WPTV To the Point with Michael Williams.
It is Super Tuesday, the biggest day of the Democratic primary campaign. This evening, the Democratic candidates await results in 14 states and one U.S. territory, American Samoa. What can we expect? What will it mean ultimately for our primary and the shape of the race to come? Florida coming up, of course, March 17th. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of To the Point here on Super Tuesday. Tonight, the 5 remaining candidates await results on a day that could determine the nominee. After today's voting, about 40% of total delegates will be awarded. We welcome our WPTV political analyst, Brian Crowley, Mariana Mancuso. Let's go back also just a moment, if we have it, to the graphic of the candidates. You know them well now. Bernie Sanders, of course, the progressive frontrunner, Joe Biden, the former vice president. Also, as well as you look at the list, Elizabeth Warren, the Massachusetts senator, fighting for that progressive vote that Sanders so far has held claim to. Michael Bloomberg on the ballot for the first time on Super Tuesday, the former New York mayor and billionaire here in West Palm Beach tonight. And Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, way back in the polls, will not be a factor tonight, but nonetheless in it. We have our WPTV News Channel 5 reporter Todd Wilson at the Palm Beach Convention Center with a live look at what's happening for the Bloomberg rally there. Todd.
Well, you know what? We're in the big ballroom here, and they just started really letting people in about maybe 30, 35 minutes ago. But it's a slow trickle in, actually, because there's a lot of food out in the hallway, so a lot of lines, and also there are a lot of people purchasing the Mike Bloomberg 2020 T-shirts. But once they come into this ballroom, let me step out of the way so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a decent-sized crowd out here. But I'm going to tell you something. Once they get in here, they're going to hear a DJ, and I got to be honest with you, the DJ is actually pretty good. So most people are standing around listening to music. They're either looking at their phones or talking to people. They're all waiting for, everything to start. It's 7 o'clock, so they're going to have some speakers, and then Bloomberg shows up. So definitely people are enjoying themselves. Live in West Palm Beach, Todd Wilson, WPTV, News Channel 5.
We'll see if the political music is something that Mr. Bloomberg appreciates.
Clearly, we're not in the right place.
I know, we should be with Todd right now. We shall see. Mr. Bloomberg, we'll see what song he's singing at the end of the night. On the ballot for the first time, we'll talk more about Florida in the second half of our broadcast, but we can't ignore the Bloomberg rally here. A lot of Trump supporters out there as night, supporters of President Donald Trump. Your first take as we look at Super Tuesday, Brian.
Well, I mean, this is a night where Bloomberg needs to prove that he's really in it. He needs to pick up a good chunk of delegates. It's a big question as to whether or not he can. And that part of the reason he's in Florida tonight is because he made stops in Orlando and Miami today. And he knows how important Florida is going to be to him. But he needs to do well tonight, at least some of the Super Tuesday states.
Mariana.
Bloomberg will find out tonight if the $500 million that he spent nationally on ad buys will actually pay dividends for him. And judging by his stance in Miami when he was talking with reporters about the potential of a brokered convention, which is the only path he said he saw forward, that could be problematic for him tonight. And
again, he spent a great deal of that money right here in Florida, and we'll talk more about that as we look at the lay of the land. Let's go to graphic that shows you at home the delegate count as we stand here today, heading into Super Tuesday. Polls closing in states across the eastern tier of the country, the eastern time zone. You look at the 14 states now. Joe Biden, the former vice president, hoping to do very well in places like Tennessee. Our hearts, of course, going out to the people in and around Nashville after tornadoes there today, devastating ones that also far down on the list of concerns, but did push back some of the polling going on. But again, prayers of the nation go to the Nashville area. Alabama, he hopes to do well. Arkansas, Virginia, North Carolina. Elizabeth Warren, the argument is if she doesn't do well in Massachusetts, her own home state, big trouble. California and Texas, the biggest prizes. Let's look at the delegate count there. You're looking, essentially, if we can go back to that map right now, you're looking at Bernie Sanders with 60 delegates right now, Joe Biden 54, Elizabeth Warren with 8. The biggest prizes, California with 415 delegates up for grabs tonight, Texas 218. The total delegates needed to clinch the nomination, nearly 2,000, 1,991. So right now, nominally anyone's game, but Bernie Sanders seems well positioned for California and Texas right now as we go into the night.
He has quite a lead in California, and we know that that will actually pay dividends if he does win California. The question that I'm looking to answer is to find out if Biden will be able to firewall him in Texas and take home a win for those delegates, because a third of the delegates will be awarded tonight, and either Joe Biden will pack it in or he'll be able to continue on.
The argument is that Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar drop out of the race. They go to Dallas to throw their support behind Joe Biden to help coalesce, they hope, moderate voters around a moderate candidate. Mike Bloomberg wants to peel some of that away. The other argument, though, Brian, so many people voted early, whether they came in late in the game to push for Joe Biden as they did last night may not matter as much in the political calculus that you at home will look at tonight.
Well, I'm one of the folks out there who actually thinks voting early is not a very good idea in any election cycle. I just think there are too many things that can happen, and this is sort of another example of what can happen. There are hundreds of thousands of ballots that are in. People voted for Buttigieg or any of the other candidates. They now may feel like those were wasted ballots, but the fact that they threw their support behind Biden could help tonight.
And the fact of the matter is, for him, Democrats award proportionally. You have to reach a 15% threshold in each state in order to grab delegates, but it's a proportional allowance. It's not winner take all.
We also have to get 15% in each congressional district.
That's right. So the bar's high enough, and some argue can Joe Biden make that bar in some states. Others argue, can Mike Bloomberg here in West Palm Beach tonight clear that bar with all the millions he's spent? And does he peel away a lot of votes from Joe Biden, or does he go away saying, I just wasn't a factor at all?
Well, you could have a scenario where, I should emphasize, the first ballot is where you need 1,991 to win the nomination. When you move on to the second ballot, the number's several hundred higher, because that's when the superdelegates are allowed to vote. And also you start the swapping of delegates. So, I mean, there's always the potential that Biden doesn't get enough delegates on the way, but if he's just a few hundred short and the delegates that supported Buttigieg and the other candidates go to Biden, that could put Biden over the top.
Right, and to Brian's point, when it comes to delegates, the delegates that have been awarded to Buttigieg and Klobuchar, which I'm not sure Klobuchar really has any, but they've all been released, and so they can actually now vote for anybody at the convention.
The numbers can be mind-numbing to any of us. Let's talk a bit, although crucially important, of course, if you're going to get to the end game, but let's talk philosophy now. We now have a race that's coalesced clearly around progressive moderates. Bloomberg Biden, or Warren, who hopes to make up ground on Bernie Sanders. But the choice has never been clearer than it is tonight. Talk about the philosophical debate and political war going on tonight for those votes and for this party, the Democratic Party, to coalesce around a philosophy and a candidate.
Well, we've seen the entire, in terms of Elizabeth Warren, she has pivoted multiple times in terms of her strategy and who the candidate is that she wants to be. And we saw her pivot again to go away from Bloomberg attacking him to move to Bernie Sanders. And I think that the reality is that's showing that she's fighting for her life, not only as a candidate, but also in Massachusetts, because the reality is that she could lose her home state to Bernie Sanders.
Brian, you've covered politics a long time. Talk about the fight within the party. Joe Biden, the former vice president, saying we want results, not revolution. A clear swipe, of course, at Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders says, aha, look at corporate America. Look at suddenly more donations coming to Biden. This is a clear fight for the heart and soul of the party with the elites, he argues, not so much unreminiscent of a debate somebody else made in 2016, Donald Trump, then candidate Trump. And he's arguing it's a clear fight for moving forward in a progressive fashion versus playing it safe. Joe Biden, on the other hand, says we're not going to get anywhere with an avowed democratic socialist. It's a fight unlike any we've seen in the party for perhaps ever.
Well, I mean, I think we saw this in 2016 when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were challenging each other. And I think one of the things that stands out for me in 2016 is that when you look at combine the Bernie Sanders voters with the Trump voters, the one thing they had in common was an anti-establishment, throw the bums out. While Bernie's folks didn't use the term deep state, it was essentially the same thing. There's still, and when you look at Bernie Sanders voters today, there's still a lot of unhappiness with what's going on in Washington and with government in general, and the Trump voters are similar to that. There's a lot of unhappiness in the country with what's going on in D.C.
Senator Sanders has gotten the youth vote in many respects. Some might argue 78 years old, and that yet those under the age of 45.
Well, there's nobody under 70 still on the ballot.
Exactly, exactly. But it's ironic to see somebody his age.
Baby boomers are still hanging in.
Hanging in there. We've still got some fight left in us. The argument is why I say it's different. 2016, he didn't have the organization around him. He's done a lot more. Hillary Clinton was the clear presumptive favorite. There was a lot of argument among Bernie Sanders supporters that the game was rigged in 2016. Nonetheless, here he's got clear organizational advantages, big fundraising advantages. As we look at issues, Mariana, Is it Medicare for all that is driving voters? Is it free college tuition? If you had to say where your sense is, as you talk to people out on the streets, where they're coalescing around, what issues drive them to which candidate, what is your sense of that?
For Bernie Sanders, Medicare for all is actually not necessarily the driving force for a lot of his young voters. The driving force for a lot of his young voters is the thought of all the free stuff that they're going to get. The fact is that nobody's asking the question, who's going to pay for that? And so for the young voters, they're looking at free college tuition because that is a burden that they are trying to bear as they go through to pay for their college. But Medicare for all is really losing some steam, and we've seen Elizabeth Warren also.
Let me just quickly note that apparently Virginia has already been called for Joe Biden, and that's let's just say the political punditry is calling this very big news because they're suggesting that since it got called moments after the polls closed, it suggests a very big win for Joe Biden in Virginia.
He was leading with an RCP average of 17.5 heading in, so the fact that he took Virginia.
Well, it's drama. We'll take whatever drama we have at the moment. Brian, issues, because a lot of you at home fairly say you're always talking about numbers in the horse race. As it relates, boil it down to issues that are driving voters' thinking. It's not the numbers, but the issues you think that will coalesce them around the progressive arm of this party versus the moderate wing of the party.
Well, the progressive arm of the party, Bernie Sanders, you know, they're talking about free college education. They're talking about a national health care plan. They're as the Republicans joyfully call it, socialism on steroids. And for a lot of young people are facing enormous student debt. If they're not facing student debt right now, they know that if they go to college, they may wind up with huge student debt. So that's appealing to a lot of young voters. Healthcare is a big issue for a lot of people. I know a woman who recently was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Her insurance, she was told she had to have surgery. Her insurance company turned down the surgery. You know, those are the kinds of issues that people are looking at on a family-by-family basis.
The Biden-Bloomberg part of this debate argue we can't afford the price tag. Anywhere from, the arguments are 40 to 60 trillion over 10 years. Bernie Sanders says we can't afford not to make healthcare a human right that everybody has. Joe Biden argues we can get there with the Affordable Care Act and expansion. So it's this tug of war between incrementalism and between, as Joe Biden says, results versus full-on revolution. Pete Buttigieg just dropped that, said it eloquently. Final quick take before we go to break.
I would just say that, you know, the Biden-Obama administration did not handle the Affordable Care Act well. They couldn't even get the computers started. It fumbled from the outset, and I'm not sure that's something to hang his hat on.
Final take before we go to break.
I would agree with Brian. That has been a disaster since they rammed it through Congress.
We will be back and look a little more with our focus toward Florida in 2 weeks with one of the candidates already here tonight, Michael Bloomberg. Coming up, what do the results mean as we look at the shape of the Florida primary, our mega state and mega important as always, and what happens in November. Stay with us.